My name is Elise Navarro. I am 27 years old, and I grow flowers for a living. The night before my wedding, I stayed up until 2 in the morning finishing the last centerpiece by hand. 160 white peonies that I had planted in my own garden 3 months earlier, watered every morning before coffee, trimmed every evening after dinner. I could still feel the pollen under my fingernails and smell the faint sweetness of roses clinging to my hair when my mother called at 6 in the morning, her voice so soft it almost disappeared beneath the sound of the birds outside my window. She said, "Sweetheart, your father and I are in row 14, right next to the kitchen doors. Is that a mistake?" It was not a mistake. I got to the venue early that morning, before the caterers, before the florist delivery van that was bringing the extra greenery I had ordered to fill the window ledges. The Whitfield family had chosen a winery estate outside of Charlottesville, the kind of place where the gravel driveway alone cost more than my parents made in a year. Beverly, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, had insisted on the venue, insisted on the guest list, insisted on the menu, the photographer, the string quartet. Marcus told me to let it go each time. "Look, my mom just wants to help. I just think we should let her have this one." That sentence had become the background music of our entire engagement. But the flowers were mine. Beverly could not touch the flowers. I walked through the main hall, checking every arrangement I had placed the evening before. The rosemary garlands along the aisle were holding their shape. The climbing jasmine around the archway still smelled like a good dream. I straightened a peony that had tilted overnight in its mason jar, pressing its stem gently between my fingers until it stood right again. This was the one part of the wedding where my hands had built every single thing the guests would see, and no one could rearrange it without me knowing. Then I found the seating chart in the bridal suite. It was printed on heavy cream cardstock, Beverly's handwriting style, calligraphy that probably cost $3 a name. I scanned for my parents, Frank and Linda Navarro, row 14, table 22. I looked at the venue map pinned beside it. Row 14 was the last row of chairs before the service corridor, the narrow hallway where the catering staff would be wheeling trays back and forth during the ceremony. I could hear it from where I stood, the faint clatter of stainless steel already being stacked in the staging area on the other side of the wall. My parents would sit closer to the kitchen than to their own daughter. I counted. 13 rows between them and me. Beverly's college friends, women whose names I had never heard before last October, filled rows 1 through 3. Her book club occupied row 4. Her Pilates instructor was in row 5. I called Marcus. He picked up on the third ring, his voice warm and easy, the voice he always used when he wanted something to go away quietly. I told him about the seating. He let out a small breath, the kind that was supposed to sound patient, but landed closer to annoyed. "Look, babe, do not make this a thing. I just think Mom was trying to optimize seating for the guest count. You know how many people we are fitting in there. You are being too sensitive about this." I hung up and went to find Beverly. She was in the back prep room, standing over a clipboard with the wedding planner and 2 assistants who were steaming tablecloths. Beverly did not whisper. She did not pull me aside. She did not even lower her voice when I asked about row 14. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has interrupted something far more important than themselves and said, loud enough for every person in that room to hear, "Their poverty will embarrass us. Your father is a plumber, Elise. He does not belong in the front row of a Whitfield wedding. We cannot have that kind of impression on our guests." The room went still. The wedding planner stared at her clipboard like it contained instructions for surviving the next 10 seconds. The 2 assistants stopped mid-fold, their hands frozen on the white linen. Somewhere on the other side of the wall, I could hear someone arranging wine glasses, the tiny clink of crystal touching crystal. And in the hallway beyond that, someone laughed. all the sounds of a beautiful day being built on top of something rotten. I did not yell. I did not cry. I looked past Beverly and through the doorway into the main hall, where I could see the centerpiece I had just straightened, the white peony standing upright in its jar, and I thought about how Beverly had complimented those flowers 3 separate times this week without ever once asking who made them. The woman calling my father an embarrassment was standing in a room that his daughter's hands had made beautiful, and she had no idea. A week ago, Marcus had taken my face in his palms, kissed my forehead, and said, "I will talk to Mom. Trust me." I had believed him because I wanted to, standing there, with the taste of that promise still somewhere at the back of my throat. I started to wonder whether he had ever said a single word to her at all. I walked to the window of the bridal suite and looked out at the parking lot. My parents' car had just pulled in, the old blue sedan with the dent above the rear wheel that my father kept meaning to fix. I watched him step out and walk around to my mother's side to open her door. He always did that, even at the grocery store, even when it was raining, even when his back was hurting from a 12-hour shift under someone else's sink. He opened her door, and she stepped out. And then the two of them stood together beside the side mirror, my father adjusting a borrowed necktie that was slightly too short, my mother reaching up to smooth his hair where it had gone flat on one side. She said something I could not hear from behind the glass, and he laughed. And she straightened his collar, and they stood there for a moment, in the early morning light, looking like two people who had put on their very best for the happiest day they could imagine. They did not know what Beverly had just said about them. They did not know about row 14. They were smiling. I turned away from the window. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Do not worry about the seats, sweetheart. Dad and I can sit anywhere. We are just so happy for you." 4 hours until the ceremony. I was standing in the middle of a winery that someone else had paid for, wearing yesterday's pollen under my fingernails, holding a phone full of grace from a woman who had just been assigned a seat next to the kitchen, and somewhere in the back of the building, Beverly Whitfield was still giving orders as if the world she had arranged was the only one that mattered, and I had to decide what to do about it. The first thing I did was call Marcus again. Not to ask about the seating this time. I was done asking. I told him, word for word, exactly what his mother had said to me in front of the wedding planner, and the 2 assistants, and the half-steamed tablecloths, and the silence that followed. I told him she used the word poverty. I told him she said my father did not belong in the front row of a Whitfield wedding. Then I stopped talking and waited. He was quiet for 3 seconds. I counted them the way you count the gap between lightning and thunder, trying to measure how close the damage really is. "Look, I just think you are misreading the context here. Mom does not mean it that way. She was just being practical about logistics." I gripped the edge of the prep table. "She said the word poverty, Marcus. She said my father does not belong." He shifted. I could hear it in his breath. The small recalibration before he chose his next angle. "Okay, look, maybe Mom went a little too far, but you know how she is. She gets stressed about events. I just think we should not let something small ruin the biggest day of our lives. Something small. 13 rows between my parents and their daughter was something small. And there it was again, that phrase he wore like a tailored suit. Look, I just think you are overreacting. He had been saying those 3 things to me in different combinations for 2 years, and I had been swallowing them like medicine I thought I needed, not realizing the prescription was making me sicker because it was not the first time. 6 months ago, Beverly hosted a dinner for her friends at the country club. She introduced me to 3 women I had never met and said, "This is Marcus's fiancé. She does flower arranging. It is a lovely little hobby." The word hobby landed on the table like a fork dropped on porcelain. I had been running my own floral design business for 4 years. I had done weddings, funerals, corporate events, and a gallery opening in Richmond that got written up in the local paper. But Beverly said hobby, and the three women smiled politely, and later in the car, I told Marcus it bothered me. He put his hand on my knee and said, "Look, she was complimenting you in her own way. I just think you read too much into things." 3 months ago, when the guest list was finalized, I noticed that my 2 closest friends were not on it. 30 people I had never met from Beverly's side were included. But Tara and Simone, the women who had helped me build my first greenhouse out of reclaimed wood and plastic sheeting, were cut. I brought it up. Marcus did not even look up from his phone. "Look, the venue has a cap. I just think we should prioritize family." 40 of Beverly's friends counted as family. My 2 counted as overflow. Each time, the same formula. "Look, I just think," and then the pivot, the gentle shove that turned my pain into my problem. I did not have a name for it then. I just knew that every conversation with Marcus about his mother ended with me feeling like I had walked into a room with a legitimate concern and walked out apologizing for having brought it up. I went back to the bridal suite to get my floral shears. I had left them on the vanity that morning, next to the emergency kit I had packed with wire, extra ribbon, and a small bottle of bloom preservative. The door to the adjacent dressing room was open about 3 inches, and through the gap, I could hear Beverly on the phone. She was not using her public voice, the warm, careful, community theater version she performed for guests and clergy and anyone she wanted to impress. This was her real voice, direct, efficient, the voice of someone who had already won and was just confirming the score. "Marcus agreed to the seating arrangement last Tuesday," she said. "He saw the chart. He said it was fine as long as I handled it quietly." A pause. The other person spoke. Then Beverly again. "I told him it was better this way." He agreed. "You know how he is. He just needs someone to make the decision for him, and then he is fine." I stood behind that door with my floral shears in my hand, and I did not move. I did not breathe loudly. I did not push the door open or storm in or do any of the things a woman in a movie would have done. I just stood there. And I listened to the world I had been building for 2 years come apart at the seams with the quiet efficiency of a thread being pulled from a hem. Last Tuesday, he saw the chart. He said it was fine. Last Tuesday was the same night Marcus had sat on our couch, taken my face in his hands, and told me he would talk to his mother, that he would handle it, that I should trust him. He had kissed my forehead afterward, and I had leaned into it because I believed that the man who kissed me and the man who made promises to his mother were the same person. They were not. They had never been. On the other side of the wall, someone tested the microphone. Testing. 1, 2, testing. A chair scraped across the floor. Glasses clinked. Somewhere far away, a woman laughed, high and bright and careless, the sound of a celebration being assembled one piece at a time, every piece stacked on top of a lie I had just heard through a door that was not even properly closed. I felt the way you feel when you are standing on a frozen lake and you hear the first crack beneath your feet. Not falling yet, but knowing. I walked out to the hallway and called Gloria. I did not cry. I did not explain. I just said, "Gloria, I need you at the venue, as soon as you can." She did not ask why. She did not ask what happened. She just said, 30 minutes, and hung up. That is how you know someone is yours. Not by the questions they ask, but by the ones they skip. While I waited, I sat on the floor of the bridal suite with my back against the wall and my floral shears resting across my lap. And I started counting. Not money, not mistakes. I counted the number of times in 2 years that I had felt that specific unease after a conversation with Marcus. The tightness in my chest that came from hearing something that did not match what I had seen with my own eyes, the dull ache of being told that the thing I was standing inside of was not real. I counted dinners where Beverly dismissed me, and Marcus repackaged the dismissal as a compliment. I counted decisions made without me that were later explained to me as collaborative. I counted the quiet moments after arguments when Marcus would rub my back and say, "We are okay, right?" And I would say, "Yes," because the alternative felt too enormous to hold. I stopped at 17. Not because I ran out, because I did not want to keep going. The door to the bridal suite opened. I looked up, expecting Gloria, expecting her worn leather bag and her no-nonsense walk, and the faint smell of potting soil that never quite left her clothes. But it was not Gloria. It was Marcus. He was early. He was carrying 2 coffees. He was smiling the smile I had fallen in love with 26 months ago. The one that made his eyes crinkle at the corners and his whole face look like it had been designed specifically to make you believe him. He set the coffees down, leaned in, kissed my forehead and said, "Hey, beautiful, ready for the best day of our lives?" And for the first time, I looked at that smile and did not feel warmth. I saw a seating chart. I did not answer him. I just nodded. The way you nod when someone hands you a menu in a language you do not speak. And Marcus did not notice the difference because Marcus had never been looking closely enough to notice. He kissed my forehead again, said something about needing to greet the early guests and check in with the groomsmen, picked up one of the coffees, and walked out. The door had not even finished closing behind him when it swung open again from the other side, and Gloria Mendez stepped through it like she had been standing in the hallway waiting for exactly the right man to leave. She was carrying her worn leather bag over one shoulder, the one she had been using since before I met her, with the broken zipper she refused to replace because she said it gave the bag character. She smelled faintly of potting soil and bergamot, and she did not say hello. She walked straight to the seating chart pinned to the wall, studied it for 5 silent seconds, then turned to me and said, "So your mother-in-law seats guests the way an accountant files tax returns." By net worth, I laughed. It came out broken, half sob and half something close to relief. But it was the first time I had laughed all morning, and it felt like cracking open a window in a room that had been sealed shut. Gloria set her bag down and looked at me the way she had looked at me when I was 15 and accidentally killed an entire flat of snapdragons by overwatering them. Patient, direct, waiting for me to stop panicking so she could teach me something. "What do you want?" she said. "Tell me the truth." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I did not know what I wanted. I knew what I did not want. I did not want my parents sitting next to a kitchen door. I did not want to marry into a family that treated my father like a stain on their guest list. But wanting to leave and knowing how to leave are 2 very different things when you are standing in a wedding dress that has already been paid for. Gloria nodded. "Then do not decide yet. But when you do, decide for yourself. Not for the caterer, not for the dress, not for him. I need you to understand something about my family, because otherwise what happened next will not make sense. And the only way I can explain it is to go back before the seating chart and the winery and the man who said look every time he wanted me to stop seeing clearly. My father, Frank Navarro, is a plumber. He has been a plumber since he was 19 years old, working under sinks and behind walls in other people's houses so that the water runs and the pipes hold and the life inside those walls keeps moving without anyone thinking about why. His hands have a callus on the 3rd knuckle of each finger that has been there so long it is part of him, like a ring he never takes off. He comes home smelling like copper and joint compound, and he washes his hands 3 times before dinner, but the lines in his palms still carry the day. My mother, Linda, works the night shift at an assisted living facility outside of Charlottesville. She comes home at 6:30 in the morning smelling like antiseptic and lavender lotion, and before she goes to sleep, she wraps her arms around whoever is closest and holds on like she is reminding herself that the world outside of that building still has warmth in it. When I was little, that person was always me. She would come through the door, kick off her shoes, and pull me onto her lap, even when I was too old for it, and I would breathe in that strange combination of disinfectant and the fading perfume she had put on 12 hours earlier. And I would think, this is what love smells like when it has been working all night. We were not wealthy. Our house was small. Our car was old. And the farthest we ever traveled was a long weekend in Myrtle Beach that my parents saved for over a year. But when I was 14 and told my father I wanted to learn how to arrange flowers, he set his alarm for 4 in the morning every Saturday and drove me 40 minutes each way to Gloria's shop so I could sweep floors and watch and learn. He did that for 2 years without missing a single week. He would sit in the car with a thermos of coffee and the radio turned low to the news. And sometimes, when I came out after 3 hours of sorting stems and cleaning buckets, I would find him asleep in the driver's seat with his head tilted back and his mouth slightly open. And he never once complained about the drive or the waiting or the early mornings. He never even mentioned it as a sacrifice. To him, it was just what you did. Your kid says she wants to learn something. You get in the car. There was a story my father used to tell me when I was growing up. Not often, and never to impress anyone. Just the way some people mention things that happened to them, the way you would mention the weather. He told me that about 30 years ago. When he was still young and working out of a van he shared with another plumber, he noticed a car parked near the supply store where he bought his fittings. The same car, every day, for 2 weeks. Eventually, he saw a young man sitting in it eating crackers out of a box, and he realized the man was living in it. My father did what my father does. He walked over, knocked on the window, and said, "You need a place to stay?" He brought the man home and let him sleep in our garage for 6 months. Gave him a key, gave him a space heater, gave him $2,000 out of the money my parents had been saving to fix the roof. My mother was not thrilled. My father told her, "We fix the roof later. This man needs it now." The man stayed through the winter and into the spring. Then one morning the garage was empty. The key was on the workbench, and there was an envelope with $2,000 in cash and a handwritten note that said, "Thank you." My father kept the note in his toolbox for years. He never called the man. The man sent a few letters, then the letters stopped. And that was that. I asked my father once, when I was maybe 16, whatever happened to the man from the garage. He was driving me to Gloria's shop, 4:30 in the morning. The road still dark and the coffee still hot. And he glanced at me and said, "I do not know, kid. Kindness does not need a receipt." That was the whole story. He never brought it up again. I was still holding that memory when the door to the bridal suite opened, and Beverly walked in. She was wearing a different face than the one from this morning. Softer, controlled, the public version, the one she assembled like a place setting before stepping into any room where she might be observed. She saw Gloria and paused for half a second, recalculating, then turned to me with a voice so warm it could have melted candle wax. "Elise, I hope we can move past this morning. We are all family here. I would hate for Marcus to feel torn on his own wedding day. You know how much we all love each other." She looked at Gloria. "And who is this?" Gloria did not stand up. "The woman who taught her everything she knows about flowers, including the ones you keep complimenting." Beverly's smile did not move, but something behind it tightened. She turned back to me, stepped closer, and lowered her voice the way someone lowers a blade. "I just want you to know, we have 200 guests arriving today. Important people. The family is counting on today going smoothly." She paused. "We would not want anything to disrupt that. For anyone's sake." Then she left. The door clicked shut behind her with the kind of precision that only comes from someone who controls even the way she exits a room. Gloria looked at me. That was not an olive branch. That was a leash, and she was right. Beverly had come in wearing the language of reconciliation, but every word she said was a warning. "We are family" meant fall in line. "We all love each other" meant do not embarrass us. for anyone's sake, meant or there will be consequences. She had spent 60 seconds in the room and managed to threaten me without ever raising her voice or saying a single unkind word. And I thought about my father in the garage 30 years ago saying, "This man needs it now." And I realized that I was standing between two completely different definitions of the word generosity. And only one of them was real. Guests started arriving. I watched from the window of the bridal suite as the parking lot filled and people moved toward the entrance in clusters of 2 and 3. Holding gift bags and adjusting jackets, my parents came through the main doors, and I watched them find the seating chart in the foyer, trace their fingers down the list, locate row 14, and walk to their seats without a word of complaint. My father sat down and tugged his borrowed tie straight. My mother smoothed the skirt of her dress, a dress she had altered herself from one she wore to my aunt's wedding 20 years ago. I could see the new lace she had added at the cuffs. Delicate and careful, probably sewn late at night after a 12-hour shift. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "The flowers are so beautiful, sweetheart. Dad says the peony on the left side of the stage is the prettiest one. You are so talented." They were sitting next to the kitchen doors, close enough to hear the catering staff stacking trays, and they were texting me about how beautiful the flowers were. The flowers that I had grown with my own hands, the flowers that Beverly had complimented 3 times without knowing whose hands had made them. That was the moment that hurt most. Not Beverly's cruelty, not Marcus's lies, my parents, sitting in row 14, proud of me, sending love from the last row of chairs in a room full of people who had been seated according to how much they were worth. Then a black sedan pulled into the lot. Not flashy, not a limousine, just a quiet, well-kept car that parked in the second row like it belonged there without trying. A man stepped out, silver hair, gray suit, no pocket square, no cufflinks, no visible effort to be noticed, but the way he moved through the parking lot, unhurried, shoulders back, looking around with the ease of someone who had walked into 1,000 rooms and never once worried about whether he belonged, that told you everything his clothes did not. Beverly saw him from the entrance, and I watched her face change. The control she wore like armor softened into something I had never seen on her before. Eagerness, almost nervousness. She crossed the gravel toward him so fast she nearly stumbled on a loose stone. And she greeted him with both hands extended and a voice I had never heard her use with my parents or with me or with anyone who did not have something she desperately wanted. I did not know who he was. Not yet. Beverly reached him before he was halfway up the front steps. Her hands clasped together in front of her chest like she was presenting a gift. "Mr. Calloway, we are so honored you could make it. The family is just thrilled." Her voice had changed completely. Gone was the sharp command she used on wedding planners and assistants and future daughters-in-law who asked inconvenient questions. This was a different instrument altogether, tuned to a frequency I had never heard from her. A voice made of honey and humility and the quiet desperation of someone who needed to be liked by the right person. She took his arm and guided him through the entrance, introducing him to 3 women in the front row, who leaned forward the way flowers lean toward sunlight. She pointed to row 2, the row she had reserved for her most important guests, right behind the family seats. "We saved you the best spot," she said. Richard Calloway smiled politely. The kind of smile that has been practiced over decades of saying no without offending anyone, and said, "I appreciate it. I will find my own seat, if you do not mind." Beverly's smile held, but I could see the tiny adjustment behind it. The recalculation. The moment where a woman who controls every seating chart and every guest list and every name on every place card realizes that someone in the room does not intend to be placed. He walked past row 1, past row 2, past the book club, and the Pilates instructor and the college friends whose names I still did not know. He moved through the aisle with the same unhurried certainty I had noticed in the parking lot. And as the row numbers climbed, I watched Beverly's expression shift from confusion to concern. At row 5, she assumed he was greeting someone. At row 8, she thought he might be heading for the restroom. At row 10, she stopped smiling. He passed row 12. Then, 13. He stopped at row 14. My father was sitting with his hands folded over one knee, my mother beside him with her altered dress and her new lace cuffs, both of them quiet and patient in the last row of chairs before the service corridor. Richard looked at my father the way you look at a photograph of someone you lost and then found again. And then he smiled. Not the polished smile he had given Beverly, but a real one, the kind that starts somewhere behind the eyes and works its way outward until the whole face is in on it. He opened his arms and pulled my father into a hug, not a handshake, not a polite greeting, a full embrace. Both arms, a hand on my father's back, held long enough that the people in row 13 turned around to look. My father, the quietest man I have ever known, the man who could fix a burst pipe in a stranger's basement at midnight and never mention it the next morning, pulled back and said loud enough for me to hear from across the room, "Well, I will be. Look at you." And I knew, the man from the garage, the young man who slept in his car outside the supply store 30 years ago, who ate crackers for dinner and had nothing but a duffel bag and whatever was left of his pride. The man my father brought home, gave a key, gave a space heater, gave $2,000 he could not afford to give. That man was Richard Calloway, and Beverly Whitfield had invited him to her son's wedding to impress her friends. Seated my father next to the kitchen to hide his poverty, and had no idea that the person she was performing for owed his entire life to the man she was ashamed of. Beverly sent Marcus down the aisle to retrieve her prize guest. I watched Marcus walk to row 14 with that easy, composed stride he used when he was following instructions, and leaned down to Richard with a smile. "Mr. Calloway, we have a much better seat for you up front. My mother would love to have you closer to the family." Richard looked at Marcus. Then he looked around row 14, slowly, taking in the service corridor, the kitchen doors, the catering trays stacked against the wall. He looked back at Marcus and said, quiet and clear, "I am sitting next to the man I want to sit next to. But thank you." Marcus stood there for 2 full seconds with nothing to say. Then he walked back up the aisle. And I could see Beverly waiting for him at the front, her mouth already forming the next instruction, and Marcus shaking his head. What happened next would have been funny if it had not been so desperate. Beverly started giving orders. She told the wedding planner to move place cards. She told an assistant to bring extra flowers to row 14 to make it feel more intentional. She told someone to move the speaker closest to the kitchen door so it would seem like row 14 had premium audio. She was rearranging the entire back section of the venue in real time. And the more she moved, the more people noticed. Guests in the middle rows started whispering. A woman in row 6 turned around completely. The thing Beverly wanted most, for no one to pay attention to row 14, was being destroyed by her own hands, one frantic instruction at a time. I almost admired the efficiency of it. She had spent the entire morning making sure that row was invisible, and in the span of 10 minutes, she had turned it into the only thing anyone in the room was looking at. Then Marcus found me. He pulled me into the hallway beside the coat room, and the man who walked me into that corridor was not the man who had kissed my forehead an hour ago. That man was gone. This one had cold eyes and a jaw set tight, and a voice I had never heard, low and flat, and stripped of every soft thing he had ever put into it for my benefit. "What are you doing?" he said. "Did you tell that man to sit there? Are you trying to embarrass my family? I do not even know who he is, Marcus." He did not hear me. Or he did not care. "If you loved me, you would sit down, smile, and let this day happen. Stop making everything about yourself. No look. No, I just think. No gentle pivot, no warm hand on the knee, no careful repackaging of cruelty as concern. Just a command. Bare and cold and honest for the first time in 2 years. He was not asking me. He was telling me. And the difference between those two things was the difference between the man I thought I was marrying and the man who was actually standing in front of me. He turned and walked back toward the ceremony hall. I stood in the hallway alone, breathing in the smell of lilies from the arrangements I had placed along the corridor that morning, and the faint grease from the kitchen vent above my head. Gloria appeared at the end of the hallway. She had seen everything. She did not rush over. She did not ask if I was okay. She walked up and stood next to me, close enough that her shoulder almost touched mine, and she said, "That was not him losing his temper. That was him." Have you ever stood next to someone you were about to promise your life to and realized, not slowly, not gently, but all at once, that the person they showed you was a costume, and the real one had been there the whole time, just waiting until you were too far in to leave? Because that is exactly where I was standing, in a hallway that smelled like lilies and catering grease, with pollen still under my fingernails, and a ceremony about to begin. The music started. Someone opened the double doors, and the string quartet Beverly had chosen played the first notes of a song I did not pick. I could see the aisle, the archway draped in my jasmine, the rows of faces turning. I could see my parents in row 14, my mother already pressing a tissue to the corner of her eye. I could see Marcus at the far end, standing straight, smiling, looking like a man who had never said an unkind word in his life. I stepped into the aisle, but the question in my head was no longer whether I should marry him. The question was when I would stop walking, when I would turn around, when the crack in the ice would finally give way. Halfway down the aisle, I glanced at row 14 and saw Richard lean toward my father and say something close to his ear. My father shook his head. Richard put a hand on his shoulder and nodded. I kept walking. The ceremony moved forward the way ceremonies do when everything has been arranged by someone who treats beauty as a form of control. The string quartet played. The officiant spoke. Marcus held my hands and looked at me with eyes that had learned exactly how to perform sincerity. And I stood inside the moment the way you stand inside a house that you already know is on fire, counting the doors. From the front of the aisle, I could see everything. My parents in row 14, my mother dabbing her eyes with a tissue, my father sitting straight with his borrowed tie and his calloused hands folded neatly on his knee. Beverly in row 1, posture perfect, chin slightly raised, the portrait of a woman who had built the frame and expected the picture to stay inside it. And Richard Calloway in row 14, beside my father, the most expensive guest in the cheapest seat, looking at me with an expression I could not quite read. Then came the toasts. The MC stepped forward and introduced a very special guest and dear friend of the Whitfield family, Mr. Richard Calloway. Beverly straightened even further in her chair, which I did not think was physically possible, and leaned toward the woman beside her to whisper something. I could not hear the words, but I recognized the expression. It was pride, the kind of pride that comes not from what you have done, but from who you know and how badly you want other people to know that you know them. Richard walked to the front, took the microphone, and looked out across the room. He did not look at Beverly. He did not look at Marcus. He looked at the space between the candles and the faces and the jasmine I had wound around the archway, and he said, "I want to tell you about the man who changed my life." The room went quiet. He told the story simply, the way my father would have told it if my father were the kind of man who told stories about himself. A 22-year-old kid who came to Virginia with nothing, slept in a car for 2 weeks outside a supply store, ate crackers for dinner and washed his face in gas station bathrooms, and told himself every morning that tomorrow would be different until he stopped believing it. And then one afternoon, a man in work boots walked up to his window, knocked twice, and said 5 words that rebuilt his entire life. You need a place to stay? Richard paused. He looked down at row 14. That man gave me a key to his garage and a space heater, and 6 months of shelter and $2,000 he could not spare. Money he had been saving to fix his own roof. He never asked me to pay it back. He just said, "Pay it forward." Richard's voice did not break, but it bent. The way strong things bend when they are carrying something heavier than they expected. That man is sitting in row 14 tonight. His name is Frank Navarro, and I would not be standing here. I would not own what I own, would not have built what I built, would not have become who I became. Without him, 200 heads turned. Every person in that room looked at row 14. They looked at my father. The plumber with the borrowed tie, and the calluses on his knuckles, and the seat next to the kitchen door. My father did what my father always does when someone praises him. He looked down. He shook his head slightly. The way he waves off a compliment, the same way he waves off payment from a neighbor whose pipes he fixed on a Sunday. My mother reached over and took his hand, and she held it tight, and she did not let go. Richard was not finished. "I do not know who arranged the seating tonight," he said. "But I chose to sit in row 14 because that is the most important seat in this room." The applause started slowly, the way it does when people are still processing what they have heard. And then it grew. Someone in the middle rows stood up. Then another. Then half the room was standing. And they were not clapping for Richard Calloway, the investor. They were clapping for Frank Navarro, the plumber who gave away his roof money to a stranger and never once mentioned it at dinner. I looked at Beverly. Her face had gone white. Not the white of embarrassment, which fades. The white of realization, which does not. She was staring at Richard. Then at my father. Then at the space between them, and I could see the arithmetic happening behind her eyes as she calculated the distance between the man she had hidden and the man she had been trying to impress, and realized that distance was 0. They were the same story. And she had been on the wrong side of it the entire time. Marcus stood beside the archway with a champagne glass in one hand and nothing useful in his expression. After the speech, in the narrow space between the cocktail hour and the reception, Beverly found me. She pulled me behind a column near the side entrance, her fingers tight around my elbow. Her voice was fast and controlled, running on the last fumes of authority she had left. "This is a wedding, not a stage. We cannot let this get out of hand. Do not let this ruin our day." I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face. Then I said, slowly, "You are right, Beverly. This is a wedding. And you just showed me exactly what family I was about to marry into." Her mouth tightened. "Everything we did was to protect this family's reputation. You seated my father next to the kitchen and called him an embarrassment. The man who made your most important guest. Everything he is. I let that land." Then I said, "That is not protection, Beverly. That is a confession." She did not respond. She let go of my arm and walked back toward the reception. And for the first time since I had known her, Beverly Whitfield did not have a sentence ready. Richard found me a few minutes later near the garden entrance. He spoke quietly, the way people speak when they are offering something that cannot be taken back. "I know what happened with the seating. Elise, I heard what she said this morning. The staff talks." He paused. "If you want, I can say more. I can go back in there and tell every person in that room exactly why your father was sitting where he was sitting. I can make sure they all know." He was handing me a weapon. The most powerful kind. The truth. Delivered by the one person Beverly had spent the entire day trying to impress. In front of every witness she had carefully assembled. It would have been complete. It would have been devastating. It would have been exactly what she deserved. If someone handed you the exact weapon you needed to destroy the person who humiliated your parents, right there, in front of every single witness, Would you use it? Or would you put it down? Because that is the choice I had. And I need you to understand what I did next and why. Richard waited. Beverly was inside, circling the reception hall, trying to reassemble her composure. Marcus was pouring wine for guests and laughing at something someone said, performing normalcy with the ease of a man who had been performing his entire life. And I was standing in a garden that smelled like jasmine and decisions. I looked at Richard Calloway standing in the garden with the evening light catching the silver in his hair. And I thought about my father in that garage 30 years ago, handing over money he did not have to a person he did not know, and I said, "Thank you." But no, my father would never want someone to be publicly humiliated because of him, not even someone who humiliated him. Richard studied me for a long moment, the way you study something that reminds you of something else, and then he nodded once and said, "You are your father's daughter." 5 words. That was all. And they hit harder than anything Beverly had said all day, because they were true, and because the man saying them had earned the right to know. I want to be honest with you about why I said no. It was not because I am a better person than Beverly. It was not because I believe in turning the other cheek, or rising above, or any of the polished phrases people put on wall art to make forgiveness sound easy. I said no because if I had let Richard go back in there and tear Beverly apart in front of every guest she had spent a lifetime curating, I would have become her. I would have been a woman using power to humiliate another woman in public. And I had just spent an entire day learning exactly what that looks like from the inside. There is a difference between choosing peace and choosing silence. I was not going to be quiet. I was just going to aim at the right target. I walked back into the reception hall. Marcus was standing near the bar with a champagne glass, talking to 2 of his groomsmen, wearing his good smile, the one that fits like a glove. He did not see me coming. I stopped in front of him and waited until his eyes found mine, and then I slipped the ring off my finger and placed it in his open palm. I kept my voice low enough that only he and the 2 men beside him could hear. I cannot build a family with someone who tells me he loves me on Monday and agrees to seat my father next to the kitchen on Tuesday. You knew, Marcus. You saw the chart last week. You said it was fine. His face did something I had never seen it do before. It went blank. Not angry, not sad, not performative, just empty, like a screen that had lost its signal. Then the reflex kicked in, the old software running one last time. "Look, Elise, we can talk about this. We have been talking," I said. "The problem is, you have been saying 2 different things to 2 different people, and I just figured out which version was real." He stood there holding a ring and a champagne glass, one in each hand. And for the first time in the 2 years I had known him, Marcus Whitfield had nothing to say. No look, no I just think, no gentle redirect. Just a man in a suit standing in the wreckage of the only version of himself he knew how to be. I turned toward the door. Beverly caught me before I reached it. Her heels clicked fast across the floor, and her voice came out high and fractured, the careful architecture of control finally crumbling. "You are making a mistake. I did everything for this family." She caught herself, saw the faces turning, switched channels mid-sentence, pulling the public mask back on like a coat she grabbed from the wrong closet. "She is emotional. We all just need a moment." But the room had already shifted. The people who had stood and clapped for my father 20 minutes ago were not looking at Beverly the same way anymore, and she could feel it. She turned to a cluster of her friends near the gift table and said, "I did not mean it the way it sounded." And the sentence hung in the air like a confession, because the only people who say that are people who said exactly what they meant and got caught. No one stopped her. No one comforted her. She was performing to a room that had already changed the channel. Gloria was parked outside. Engine running, passenger door unlocked, her worn leather bag tossed in the back seat like she had thrown it there in a hurry. I climbed in and pulled the door shut. And she did not ask me what happened. She did not ask if I was sure. She just looked at me, put the car in drive, and said, "Buckle up, kid." I almost laughed. Almost, before we pulled out of the lot. I turned and looked back through the rear window at the winery. Golden light pouring from every window. Silhouettes moving inside like shadows in a music box. Somewhere in there were 160 white peonies that I had grown from bulbs in my own garden. Watered every morning, trimmed every evening, planted 3 months ago for the happiest day of my life. Turns out the happiest day of my life was not the day I got married. It was the day I chose not to. The car turned onto the main road. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the trees pass in the last of the daylight. And for the first time in 2 years, I did not reach for my phone to check what Marcus was thinking. Gloria drove in silence for 5 minutes. Then, without looking away from the road, she said, "My shop has a back room. Small. But there is a garden out back. Peonies grow well there." I looked at her. She kept her eyes on the road. "You do not have to answer now." I moved into the back room of Gloria's shop the next morning. It was small, barely wide enough for the old daybed and the dresser she had cleared out, with a window that looked onto a narrow garden choked with weeds and one stubborn rosebush that had survived years of neglect. I did not cry as much as I expected. What I did instead was worse. I kept catching my body, running the old software, my hand reaching for the phone to check Marcus's messages before I remembered there was nothing to check. My eyes opening at 4 in the morning because that was when his alarm used to go off. My hands folding the towel in half, out of habit, the way you fold when you are folding for 2. Grief does not always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like muscle memory that has not gotten the memo. The story traveled on its own. By the 3rd day, people in Charlottesville were not talking about a canceled wedding. They were talking about row 14. I heard it secondhand from Gloria, who heard it from a client, who heard it from someone who had been there. "You hear about the Whitfield wedding? The bride made all the flowers herself, and the groom's family put her parents next to the kitchen. Then, the richest man in the room sat down next to them." The story did not need me to tell it. It told itself. On the 5th day, Beverly posted on social media. Her version was elegant and controlled, the way all her versions were. "Our family is going through a difficult time. The bride chose to cancel under personal pressure. We wish her well." Within an hour, a guest from the wedding commented underneath it. "That is not exactly how I remember it, Beverly." Then another. Then another. She deleted the post by evening. The woman who had spent a lifetime building a narrative about her family discovered that narratives are only as strong as the number of people willing to believe them. On the 7th day, Marcus called. His voice was stripped of every tool he had ever used on me. No look. No, I just think. Just a man on the other end of a phone line saying, "I was caught in the middle. I did not know what to do." I held the phone to my ear and said, "You were not caught in the middle, Marcus. You chose a side. Last Tuesday." He did not argue. I hung up. On the 10th day, Gloria told me that Richard Calloway had quietly withdrawn from an investment deal with the Whitfield family's real estate firm. He did not make a public statement. He simply told his partners, "I do not do business with people I do not trust." One sentence. No explanation. Beverly had rolled out the red carpet for the man who walked away with the rug underneath her. I thought about the irony of that for a long time, and it never stopped being perfect. 2 weeks after the wedding, Richard called me. Not to offer charity or sympathy, or any of the things that people offer when they feel sorry for you. He said, "I saw the flowers you made for the wedding. Best floral work I have seen in 20 years. I have a series of real estate events next quarter that need a designer. This is a job, not a favor. Market rate." I took it. I stayed up 3 nights preparing for the first event and delivered arrangements that made the clients ask for my card. Richard introduced me to 2 more, At the second event, an open house for a luxury property, I arrived early to set up the centerpieces. White peonies, my signature. When the guest list came through that afternoon, I saw a name I recognized. Beverly Whitfield. She had accepted the invitation weeks before, trying to mend the business relationship her behavior had cost her. She did not know who was doing the flowers. She walked in and saw the peonies first. I watched her eyes move across the arrangements. The same style, the same blooms, the same hands that had decorated her son's wedding. Then she saw me, standing in my work apron beside the last centerpiece, adjusting a stem. She looked at me. She looked at the flowers. She looked at Richard across the room shaking hands with a client. And for the first time since I had known her, Beverly Whitfield did not have a single word. No we, no the family, no script at all. Just a woman standing in a room full of flowers made by the person she had called an embarrassment, at an event hosted by the man she had been desperate to impress. And there was nothing left to say. I nodded at her. Professional? Polite? No hatred. Then I turned back to the peony in my hands and finished what I was doing. I planted a new garden behind Gloria's shop. Peonies, the same variety I had grown for the wedding. I watered them every morning and trimmed them every evening, the same way I had done 3 months before. Except this time they were not for a ceremony or a man or a family that measured people by what they could afford. They were for me. And when I knelt in the dirt and looked at my hands, they were steady. One afternoon, a few weeks later, my father came by. He did not mention the wedding. He did not say, "I knew." He did not say, "I told you so." He just knelt beside me in the garden, picked up a trowel, and started working the soil around a new bulb I had just placed. We worked in silence for a while, the kind of silence that does not need to be filled, and then he leaned back on his heels and looked at the row of green shoots pushing through the earth and said, "Peonies are looking better this year than last." I brushed the dirt off my hands. "Dad, did you know who Richard Calloway was? All this time?" He nodded. "I did." "Why did you never say anything?" He looked at the garden, at the new growth, at the sun catching the tops of the leaves, and he said, "Kindness does not need a receipt, kid." A week after that, a letter arrived. Not a text, not a voicemail. A handwritten letter from Marcus, the first thing he had ever written to me that did not begin with "look" or end with a redirect. He wrote, "I was not caught in the middle. I chose wrong. I do not know if I will ever be the man you needed, but I am sorry." I read it once, folded it, and put it in the drawer beside my bed. I did not reply. Not because I hated him, because I was not ready, and I did not owe anyone my readiness on their schedule. So here is the question I want to leave with you tonight. The next time you are deciding who matters and who does not, who belongs at the front, and who gets pushed to the back, ask yourself this: what if the person you are hiding is the reason the person you are trying to impress exists at all? And what if the only thing that seat assignment really revealed was not who did not belong, but who you really are? Tell me, where are you listening from right now? Because wherever you are, I hope you remember this. The people who love you with calluses on their hands and borrowed neckties are not your embarrassment. They are your foundation, and anyone who cannot see that does not deserve a seat at your table at all.